If anyone is needing,
This meeting is being recorded.
if anyone is needing the live transcript, I believe at the bottom, you should be able to click live transcription, and then you should be able to see the words on the bottom of your screen. Okay, Kentucky. Silver Spring, Pennsylvania. Okay. Okay, I can't read all this. Y'all are coming in too fast. We'll give it a few more seconds just to let people get in, tell us where they're from. Very excited to be having this conversation on the history of social work, which I'm sure I don't have to say has its issues, but yeah, I'm sure the conversation will be fruitful. So kind of just as people come in, just a reminder that this is a space for BIPOC folks or those of us who kind of face racism to kind of own and like take the space to speak on the history of social work in regards to our topic, and also just kind of share our experience and just anything that we find fruitful or beneficial for the group to hear. As well, if you are white or do not face racism in your everyday life, we ask that you stick to the chat respectfully and stay on mute as well. We really do want this space to be cultivated for BIPOC folks and those who face racism to be able to speak and share and just have a space where they can be included and heard and valued, which is sometimes not offered in other spaces. So I'm gonna kind of go over the ground rules just so everyone is familiar with how we want to just hold this space and hold respect for one another. So it begins with recognizing, which we must recognize that we must strive to overcome this historical and divisive biases such as racism and sexism in our society, which will probably be very telling for this conversation. We must acknowledge that we are all systemically taught misinformation about our own groups and about members of other groups. This is true for everyone, regardless of our group. There is no blame. We agree not to blame ourselves or others for the misinformation we have learned, but we accept responsibility for not repeating misinformation after we have learned otherwise. We agree to respect and respectfully listen to each other without interruptions. Please, only one person speaking at a time. And also, just if someone does say something that is problematic or anything like that, feel free to just respectfully say something in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and address it or share your own opinion, you are more than welcome. We believe more in like calling in than like calling out someone. So just try to be respectful when we do that, but we also don't want to pass misinformation along. We agree that no one should be required or expected to speak for the whole race or gender. We couldn't even if we wanted to. So we understand that this is an individual experience that we share, and there will be commonalities, but there will be differences, and those are okay. Trust. Everyone has come to the table to learn, grow, and share. We will trust that people are doing their best that they can. We all make mistakes and we have bad days. Even when they occur, let's challenge and encourage each other to do better. We acknowledge once again that we may be at different stages of learning on the topic. And then lastly, share the air. So we just ask that we all share responsibility for including all voices in the discussion. So this, if you have a tendency to kind of dominate the conversation, we kind of ask that you take a step back and let others speak up. And you have the tendency to kind of stay quiet, we also challenge you to speak up and say something and take up space, because the space also does belong to you too. As well, if you are exceedingly quiet, a facilitator might call on you, but don't be nervous. We just want to know what you're thinking. We know that y'all have good thoughts to share. And we just want y'all to feel included and seen in this space. So now I'm going to pass it off to Sam to share with us a little bit about themselves and also with their son, Seth.
Thank you, Rox. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Sam Fletcher. I am the Executive Director of the New York State chapter of NASW. The facilitators and leaders of the revolution asked several months ago, we've been doing this for over a year and a half now, but they asked that I talk a little bit about Native culture at the beginning of the revolution. I am a member of the Cherokee Nation. Seth, do you want to introduce yourself? This is my son.
Hi, my name is Seth. I'm a member of the Cheyenne and Arapaho Nation. My native name is Firewolf.
So Seth and I provide a little bit of background on Native culture, and then we also talk about land acknowledgements. So tonight, we're going along with the theme of tonight and talking about history. One of the things that is key to our culture and Native culture is that we pass the history down to our children. The history of our people is always passed on by our people. So I learned our history through elders in my tribe. And with Seth, and Seth also has a brother and a sister. We are a transracial family. So we are a Native and a Black family. I actually homeschooled Seth and his siblings for 3 years when they were beginning school. For one of the main purposes was to teach them their own history, and to also, we would put in authors and different people from their people into their instruction in every subject. That's incredibly important in our culture. In addition, I wanted to teach them to critically think and to question everything when they went back to school. I can remember giving them instructions the first time they went back to school. I asked them if they knew what it meant to pledge allegiance to something. They said no. So I said, then you shouldn't do it. If you don't know what you're talking about, don't do it. And they learned quite a bit, and they questioned their teachers throughout their education. They always questioned why they were having to celebrate Columbus Day, especially as a Native family. They always questioned the history that was being taught about slavery and about other groups of people. So that is incredibly important to our culture, is that history is passed down from our people, not what, and we do not depend on what's taught in the schools. We also like to do, for people who've heard about land acknowledgements, we do them a little differently as Native people. We are currently on the land of the Mohican and the Mohawk tribes, but we talk about our connection to the land. So why is a land acknowledgement important to Native people? It's because we are intrinsically tied to the land. The land is incredibly important to who we are. We believe that the land protects us, provides for us, heals us. And let's see. Let me see. Sorry, someone's sharing their screen. I was going to see if we could stop sharing our screen just for this. Perfect. Okay. So yes, so the land is incredibly important to us. We connect to it. We believe all these things. Seth, do you want to say how you connect to the land?
For me, connected to the land, I find it to me to be relaxing and peaceful. Everybody else, we are just guests to the land. We are just guests. For me, I like to go kayaking with my mom. We both find it to be relaxing. And recently we went to Iceland for a vacation, and a lot of things we did, we found we went to like the waterfalls and stuff. Just being on the land there, it was just so relaxing. We just felt so much at peace. So to me, I just find it to be so relaxing and calming to me. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Seth.
Mm-hmm.
So we're done talking about our Native culture. So I'm going to hand this over now to Evelyn, Dawn, and Rox, who are our facilitators tonight. I think we're going to start with Evelyn and Dawn providing us with some valued history.
Hi, everybody. I'll go first. Good to see you. I know we're going to have a great discussion tonight and learning about history. What happens when you don't see yourself in social work history? What happens when you're hearing that your people who you're connected to is pathologized all the time in all the books and everything that you're reading? And you say, this isn't true. We are people who help one another. We are people who love each other. there are some people definitely in communities that have some issues where they need help, but we are more than a pathology. And I started doing history, the papers in school on people of color. And just for me to get, well, I knew I was going to work with people of color when I left social work school. So I did that for my own self, so I would be better able to help the communities that I wanted to work in. And so that's why I had to do my own work. And so one thing is, I found out, has anyone ever heard of Antonio Torres Morales? He was the first Latino social worker to get his PhD. And there's a host of Blacks. Mary Terrell, she received her PhD. She received her PhD as well. And she was a part of history. And so I just think it's very important for us to know these names and many other names. And to realize that it's not just white people who worked in social work. Now, we may have done it differently, and we did in our communities. We didn't go to school, but we're going to make sure that Mother Sarah and Sister Donna, they had food, things were going all right, making sure that we're helping one another as a collective. And so Sister Donna didn't go to social work school, but innately, she was able to help people in her community, help people in a way that it's non-traditional. And so that's where I'll stop and let Evelyn pick up.
Hello, everyone. I'm just glad to be back. It's been a while since I've had an opportunity to visit with you. And I'm going to relay some of what I had shared last year, as well as some additional things. And one of the books that I'm working from is called Black Heritage and Social Welfare, 1860 to 1930. And one of the things we want to have an awareness of is when we think about social work or social work, is that this is a phrase that was coined in the later 1800s to 1900s. So, but when we think about how we survived as Black Hispanic people, we have been dealing with social welfare, the practice of it, ever since going back, however long we want to look at going back. And if we think about specifically slavery, in that there was an not documented, but there are some papers at the beginning to come out to show this, where you had social work welfare practices going on the slave plantations. You had people who were looking out for other people's children. You had people who were helping other people who were sick. There was this sense of community that existed from the time that we got off the boat. And that is indigenous to how we were when we were in Africa. So this idea of somehow that, you know, this social welfare concept was discovered by white people, notably Jane Addams, makes it seem that prior to that time, we were not involved in social welfare at all. We may not have been using the language, but we have always been about community. And if you go back to Africa and you do some studies, particularly some of the anthropological studies in Africa, there's always been this concept of community, of not being an individual who was interested in their own particular welfare or maybe their immediate family and, you know, being isolated from others. But you go back to the matrilineal and patrilineal societies in Africa, it was about everyone. And you've heard the phrase, it takes a community to raise a child. But, you know, the resources were shared in terms of food, in terms of, you know, building homes, in terms of protection. It was not something that was isolated. And so that way of being also came over to this country, even though you had different tribes who could not speak a language of other tribes on the ship. So they had difficulty in communicating with each other. They didn't know one another. The way they lived was different, you know, because you got to remember that the people on the boat were not just from one, tribe. I mean, these were people coming all the way in from Central Africa, coming over, then being brought over to the coast to then be exported to the United States. So look at the phenomena that happened when we got over here, coming onto a strange land. All of our culture, our spiritual practices, our way of living, everything was stripped from us, everything. And this is important to understand because, you know, Nikki Giovanni talks about that, you know, we need to understand the shoulders that we're standing on. And so here you had a group of people being dropped on land, looking at white people who, for them, they did not say these are white people. Because for some Africans, seeing white people the first time they saw them was when white people came into Central Africa and began to enslave them. So they had to begin to figure out how to find a way of living under a situation which was completely, totally alien to them. And we need to really think about this. This is very important because we are here now. And if you think about now, if a spaceship came and picked you up and just took you off, and all of the other people in that spaceship could not speak English, and then landed on some other planet, just think about what that would be for you in terms of your consciousness, your ability to even question whether or not you were still alive. And so our social welfare started there. It continued, rather, not started, it continued. Mm-hmm. And we didn't language it. It was what we had to do. It's what we had to do to survive. We could not exist as a singular entity. We had to rely on each other for our survival. So fast forward, as you know, many of you who've taken social work classes will know that there really isn't any discussion about what we have done related to social welfare at all. And it almost seems like, again, that it was the white people in the early 1800s when the Industrial Revolution started, that they were the discoverers of social welfare. So I want to read just a few things to you. There's a lot here, but I got to figure out what I can pick up. And now the first thing talks about is in the prologue of this book. It says that that Black people were very much interested in improving their lives, because sometimes right now the way we are depicted in some communities is as if we don't have any interest in bettering our lives. And that when you hear about the stories of the slaves and, you know, post-slavery and Jim Crow, et cetera, it's always presented from a pictorial narrative description that we were incompetent, ineffective, whatever other negative characteristic you want to use, as a way of we needed the white people to be able to help us to function as a human being. And so it says here in the prologue of this book, it says that these early settlers were very much interested in higher and better things in life, and that they had meetings. One of the major themes that's interested in this book is that from the time that Black people had the first people who were able to get out of being a slave. This is prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, that one of the major things that they focused on was the care of children and understanding the importance of education. And so education for Black people actually started in the church. And I'm not talking about the spiritual aspect, but the church was the only institution that was allowed, listen to, allowed to exist when we were slaves. And so what Black people did then was they used the church, given that was the only, quote, institution that was able to be allowed, the church became the center of social welfare. And one of the things that was one of the earlier aspects of this was around children, and particularly children who were orphaned. It was this thing of caring, making sure that there were structures, and I'm using this language now, structures that were there to enable the children to survive. The other thing that as the free, and you also don't see much narrative on Black people who became free during the slavery period. And these Black people actually became the activists in the community. They also became the entrepreneurs in the community, and they were the ones to help start such things. There's one narrative they have in this book with this, it's a woman, where she was responsible for over like 27 different locations of educational schools for kids and then parents. You had Black people, there were some Black people who were wealthy. And those Black people who were wealthy were responsible for, not only did they support the church, but they were instrumental in creating what we might focus on now is the fraternal organizations, the sorority organizations, those types of organizations. Well, that the precursor of that was during slavery, where you had these organizations. Generally, they were started by women, rich Black women, as well as rich Black men who were free, who then sometimes worked with white people who were, part of the abolitionist movement to help them set up these organizations whereby they could begin to create the kinds of labor, educational, health, and just general social kinds of organizations that would support to help Black people in various communities, not only in the South, but in the North and also in the West. There's one story in here where there was a Black woman who was the first Black woman to open up a bank in a Black community, whereby eventually she had a portfolio that was something like $350,000 to $400,000. We're talking in the 1800s. And this woman was able to provide loans to other Black people so that they could become their own entrepreneurs. The book talks about that there were Black people were interested in becoming free, and those that did become free, they did not turn their back on other Black people. They understood, they knew that if it wasn't for them, then other Blacks who were suffering would be destroyed. And so you had this movement of social welfare beginning far earlier than any of the narratives you hear in the school about social welfare and the society and Jane Addams, and then 1915 with Flexer, and it goes on from there. So I want to just let you know that okay, this is one document that is published is by is from the 3rd Annual Convention for the Improvement of the Free People of Color in the United States, June 3rd through 13, 1833. And listen to what it says. It says, this society will aim to accomplish the following objects: to visit every family in the ward and make a register of every colored person in it, their name, sex, age, occupation, if they read, write, cipher, to induce them, old and young or both, to become members of this society. Now, as you become members of the society, what it does, they had this structure, it was induce adults to attend school and church on the Sabbath, to encourage females to form societies to help clothe poor children of color. And the clothes were to be loaned and to be taken away from them if they neglected not going to school. That sounds familiar, right? To impress their parents, the importance of having children punctual and regular in their attendance at school. They had libraries, and they used fees to be able to build these libraries. They also had mental feasts. That's interesting. It's a very interesting narrative, right? Mental feasts, which was occasions whereby there would be lectures on the sciences. They also had these speaking engagements for moral societies to speak out to young men about talents, exercising and working on their talents, to talk about good moral character, liberal education, to also identify people who were skilled and capable of conducting their trades, etc. So this is 1833 that this was happening. In a later thing, it says, the author says in the perhaps in advance of other Blacks realized that the solution to their problems, this is still in the early 1800s, realized the solution to their problems required a new concept of social welfare, one based upon free citizenry, devoid of racist distinctions, but appreciative of ethnic pluralism. Responding as was necessary, learning primarily by trial and error, members of the Black community pioneered this new kind of social welfare expertise, which remains viable today for resolving recurrent problematic social conditions. For these ideas undergird the tenacity necessary to create and strengthen life and to creatively construct a future. 1833. Then when we go on, I'm going to 1865. Okay, let me see. Okay, so now they're talking about the Black codes, and the experience of Blacks under that. They said, they were done to control Black people. And they say here, and see, these are the kinds of things that we can then begin to embed in understanding, what appears to us now, and the positives and the negatives that appear to us now. They are not germane just to 2020, 2022. I mean, we got to go back. We got to stand on history and understand that the history, some of this stuff is just so embedded. It's been so embedded in consciousness for centuries that it takes time to begin to reframe, to regroup, to work at bringing about something that is different. So they said the crucial point about these codes was their ultimate purpose. They were not designed to help the Negro through the admittedly difficult transition from the status of a slave to that of responsible freedman. Rather, the purpose of the Black codes was to keep the Negro as long as possible exactly where he was, a propertyless rural laborer under strict controls, without political rights and with inferior legal rights. So now this is the background when we move into 1865, and yet when we get to around 1865, it says, with Plessy versus Ferguson, etc., the author says, nevertheless, Blacks survived, struggled, and despite the handicaps of limited skills, resources, and means, managed to cope with the basically hostile national situation by planting in their respective local communities the seeds of mutual aid, which sometimes fell upon fertile soil and bore fruit. It was as if the Blacks had a resilience which summoned forth unheralded potential for advancement. The optimism, which basically sustains the American values of freedom and equality, was never abandoned. There was despair, but there was also the promise of a better future to be won and shared. 1865. Then we go. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so now this is, I gotta remember dates. This document is 1888. And in a document that was a petition to the Superior Court related to establishing a home for indigent colored orphan children, October 12th, 1888. The woman, a Black woman who did this, her name was Carrie Steele. First woman to establish an orphan. The concept of orphanage came from a Black community, not from the white communities. And it says here, it's considered ordered. It says to be abolished, corporate under the name of Carrie Steele Orphan Home, with full power to establish a home for colored orphan children where they may be protected and educated and given practical training as cooks, housemaids, etc. To receive donations from any and all sources in such quantities, money and property, both real and personal, as from time to time may be given to it, and to acquire such real estate exempt from taxation as is necessary for its purpose. This was in 1988, and she became the first woman to have an orphanage, which then expanded to other locations as well. Then you had in 1894, there was also the establishment, I just lost it here, the Colored Men's Protective Association. And its mission was to be known far and near as being one of the best societies among its race. Okay, and it says the Council of Good Men, which was to establish an order or union which would take care of and help those who were unable to help themselves. Okay, so that was in 1988. And then the same organization that was called, there's an organization called the Colored Protective Association. I don't know if it was established in 1894, but this document talks about 1894. And this is so great. And it says in this thrifty it says in this thrifty, rushing 19th century, where invention and enterprise are lending much in aiding the human family in rising to the high mark of that civilization which characterizes all thoroughgoing industrious people, the Negro has not shown in the least that he is wanting on any of these lines. He has organized banking systems, building and loan associations, institutions of learning, and corporations of such nature as do aid the people in acquiring wealth in many ways, which enable them to have some income outside of their daily labor. That was the Colored Men's Protective Association. I am really skipping things here, but I really want to just give you some emphasis. Okay. Then we have, as you know, W.E.B. Du Bois. And one of the interesting things that I have found that in social research, that they do not study his well-known research undertaking, considered one of the best, most thorough research undertaking, and he did it in, was it 1901? Well, he started in 1897. But yet you don't see anything in any of the research books about his research undertaking, which was called The Study of the Negro Problem. And he says, and he defines, so again, we have, if you look at some of the, and I teach macro practice, so, we look at social problems, and, we have such people defining, such as Burkhardt, and, some of these other folks I'm just blocking on right now. But anyway, so he talks about, he defines social problem in 1897. He defines it. And he says a social problem is the failure of an organized social group to realize its group ideals through the inability to adapt a certain desired line of action to given conditions of life. Thus, a social problem is ever a relationship between conditions and action. And as conditions and actions vary and change from group to group, from time to time, and from place to place, so social problems change, develop, and grow. 1897. Beautiful. And I mean, there's pages here. I mean, there's the summary on his document is just phenomenal. Then we have the role of women. We have Ida Wells Barnett. And oh, by the way, I just want to let you know something. I'm just going to go back a little bit, and I have to stop. You're going to have to let me know when I need to stop. Okay. But going back, in this book, I didn't know this, but John Brown, about John Brown, right? Well, guess what? In this book, there was a Black woman who gave him $40,000 to do what he did. And the thing of it was, she got angry with him because he wouldn't follow her advice. Because in fact, she lived in California. She gave him, I think she started with 30,000, or maybe it was the reverse. Maybe she gave him 10, but then she came from California and came to the West Coast to meet with him. And she was angry with him because he didn't follow her advice, and therefore he got, caught and all of that. And she lost her 40 grand. But now this is a Black woman and 40 grand. I mean, that's a lot of money back then. But, so you had Black people who had money, who were doing things in their communities, and who were also very, very volatile, very forceful in the abolitionist movement that is not documented. Okay, just a few more and then I'll stop. Okay, I'm going to, okay, what's this here? Okay, I won't do that one. Oh yeah, I have something asterisk. Okay, excuse me. Okay, economic progress. This is, I gotta get the right date. This is 1913. Economic progress. The Negro was freed as a penniless, landless, naked, ignorant laborer. Very few Negroes owned property in the South. A large number owned property in the North, but 90% of the race in the South were field hands, servants of the lowest class. Now today is 1913, okay? Today, 50% are farm laborers and servants, and over 1/2 of these are working as efficient modern workmen under wage contract. Above these, to use the figures of 1900, there were 750,000 farmers, 70,000 teamsters, 55,000 railway hands, 36,000 miners, 33,000 sawmill employers, 28,000 porters, 21,000 teachers, 21,000 carpenters, 20,000 barbers, 20,000 nurses, 15,000 clergymen, 14,000 masons, 13,000 dressmakers and seamstresses, 10,000 engineers and firemen, 2,500 physicians, and above all, 200,000 mistresses of independent homes and 2 million children in school. Okay. So then we move on to 1911. All right, I want to make sure I get this right. Okay. So let's talk about college. The youth in Negro colleges furnish the key to the situation, for those less thoroughly trained will not be able to grapple successfully with such serious conditions. Several schools of philanthropy are open to Negro students, but these institutions are out of reach of nearly all of these. Several Negro colleges have offered courses in economics and sociology, but in nearly every case, they have been scarcely more than the classroom discussions awfully remotely relating to the conditions among Negroes. So without that being said, without delaying longer, some of us made a beginning to secure and train Negro college youth for social work and to relate the Negro college to urban communities. The plan as started has 3 prongs. First, the preparatory instruction and training in the Negro college. Second, selecting of promising students and providing them with opportunities to further professional study and practical experience among their own people in cities. And third, the organization of social betterment work in the cities where these trained people can use their ability for social uplift. Hence, we have then Fisk University. It is one of the first Black college universities that was designed to train students, Black students, in social work. And the selection of students promised for their further training in New York. So they work with students to train in New York and other cities. And there's other things that go in there. And, I don't have time to go into that now. I think this is the last that I want to share with you. Then you had going further, and what years are we in here? We're okay. This is like this is 1915, and moving on. You had such beneficiaries. You had such people as Dr. John Haynes. You had E. Franklin Fraser, Ira D.A. Reed, Walter Chivers, Charles S. Johnson, R.R. Wright Jr. And they say here, they also say social work education for professional practice, the late and the previous historian, okay. The Philadelphia Negro with W.E.B. Du Bois was the empirical sociological research. So that was the second study that he did. And that actually triggered, his study triggered the movement for training Black young people in social work practice. His study of 1889. And so you had then students of Du Bois, you had people, studying in Atlanta, and they have some names here of people who were involved. Also, you had the first Black to teach at Columbia University, Dr. George Edmund Haynes. I read stuff from him a long time ago. So I just want to Okay, let me conclude with this, and then I'll shut up. Okay, so this document, which is written in 1921, and it says there are many elements in this better understanding by colored workers of the problems of their people. By no means the least important is the knowledge of the colored community which the worker can bring to bear on the solutions of the problems presented. It has been my experience that even the socially minded man who has lived all his life beside a large colored community has very little knowledge of the resources of that community. Just as in the daily papers, the unpleasant features of civic and national life are given prominence. Doesn't that sound familiar? So it is the unpleasant features of the Negro community which the average white person hears about. The fact that the bulk of men and women are hard workers is unknown or unthought of. This was written in 1921. So there's a lot of history that we don't know. And for any of you perhaps who are going on to do some doctoral studies, it would be nice if we had some people to actually start changing the narrative by doing the necessary research. You probably would have to go to actually source, original documents, which means travel and finding where these things are located. But we need to have this information documented and promulgated so that you, as so entering the field and have been in the field, please know that you stand on the shoulders of some very profound, strong people who did not give up, regardless of how bad the situation was, and the constant pushback on rights, that people did not give up. And it's for those people that you have the HSCBUs, you have the ability now to go to universities. When I was applying for university, I had to put my picture on the application. And so that was a way that most of your universities could choose on how many Black people that they would let into the school. So you're at another level we call a crescendo. And where you go from here is open. But I did hear your your discussion last year when some of you were expressing despondency or despair because change was not happening fast enough. And it's important not to forget your history, not to forget what people have had to endure to get you where you are today. And so therefore it's incumbent upon you now to be there for the generations who are going to come after you. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. That was, as I'm sure others feel, super powerful, also super informative. Also, I probably am speaking for myself, a lot of things I didn't know. So very much appreciate that. I know some folks are wanting to know the book that you were reading out of, or just any other helpful information or resources that you have that you can put in the chat for people to become more educated on as well.
Okay. All right, I will. The book itself is called Black Heritage and Social Welfare, 1860 to 1930. And I'll put it in the chat. I'm not sure whether you can get this book now. Okay.
It's on Amazon.
It is on Amazon? Yay!
One is for 90 and one is 60. So.
Okay, and the author is Edith Ross. Does it say that?
Yep, I looked it up.
Oh, great. That's great. That is great. Yes, please get that. And I'll put the other ones that I just didn't have time to talk about on here, that some of the, for what I call the older books.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And also to Dawn for sharing before Evelyn as well. One of the last things that we wanted to share with you, there's a document just on behalf of the National Association of Social Work, the New York State chapter, that we've been putting together as well that kind of highlights also some figures. They're not all specifically social work, but a lot of them are, as well as just other folks who have made a contribution to society that like they would be considered social workers given the title, and just information like that. I'm going to post it in the chat as a Google Doc. And you should be able to, everyone should be able to open it and look at it. I also tried to include, as Evelyn was talking, which if you saw me like looking off to the side, I was trying to include some of the people Evelyn was mentioning and put it on the doc and like information related to that, so that information can be in there, especially if there's anything mentioned that was like historical, or like one of the first, like W.D. Du Bois as well, being one of the first people to define a social problem. I made sure to include that information as well. And just anyone else that was mentioned that I could hear about, Carrie Steele as well. So that's there. It'll be a continuous working doc. But just also kind of thinking about that, like social work is so much larger. The history of social work is so much larger than what we've often been taught of, like Jane Addams started it. And then we see like there's Carrie Steele who started this orphanage like before then. So just often is not discussed or talked about, which is kind of the topic of this meeting. So we kind of just want to pose one question, and I think Evelyn hit on a lot of things, but y'all are welcome to chime in and give thoughts. But just like, what have you been taught about social work history, and what has been missing? What have you felt like it's been missing? And just to kind of control like crowd, if you could use the raise your hand function that you should be able to find at the bottom. Once you click more, it should say raise hand, and then we will call on folks to speak, just so people are not like trying to speak over each other. I see Felix. Would you like to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first just because I think it's super hard to follow Evelyn's really informative and I'm really glad that I was able to listen to that. And so I'm sure it's hard to follow, so I'm going to jump in and do it for everyone so that it's a little bit easier because I would view myself as a little bit easier to follow since so when I was taught in social work school, I think we all were taught that like Jane Addams, even if you Google mother of social work, Jane Addams pops up, which for me is really painful because I was taught that white social work is good social work, but I think in reality, it's the exact opposite. It's not just not good social work, but it oftentimes is harmful to the populations that we're trying to work with. And I think that needs to be taught in school instead of glamorizing someone. For example, Jane Addams was extremely anti-sex work. As someone who wants to do and does do sex work advocacy, something that affects so many of our Black and brown populations, to put someone on a pedestal who actively started this saviorism trend. I don't know how many people in this Zoom have heard the term white saviorism. That is to me what white social work is. And a lot of times we put ourselves on platforms as social workers in order to help folks without listening to the community that actually we're trying to help. We see that in social work research. We see white social workers come in to populations of color and extract information, but then what good does that do? Oftentimes that information just either doesn't go anywhere or isn't actually used to directly impact and actually benefit the population, and it becomes exploitation. We see white social workers actively, historically, contributing to the school to prison pipeline. I personally am an abolitionist social worker. So when I see social workers contributing to, to define the school to prison pipeline for folks, is the carceral punishment nature of the way that we run our schools, including the way that social workers contribute to the way that we punish our students, directly leads. And this largely affects our Black students and other students of color. It largely leads to this direct pipeline into prison. And us as social workers contribute to that. So when we think of the history of social work, and we say, oh, well, the history of social work, well, Jane Addams didn't do some great things. Like, yeah, she didn't do great things. And we are reliving the history of social work every day in the social work we're doing right now. So that's why, to me, it's so important to learn about how damaging social work can be, like in CPS, in schools, and even I'm a clinical practitioner, so I'm a therapist. The amount of damage that therapists do because they're not culturally affirming is incredible. So even in the line of work that I do, where I'm working individually with people, there is so much potential for harm that we're not talking about. We go into social work thinking that we're helpers, and in reality, there are so many of us who do harm because we're not educated in that. And I feel sometimes really lucky that as a person who is, has lived experience as a racially marginalized person, I have the background to be able to change that, so that I can be that person for my clients, to change the narrative that they have of social workers. Because so many of my clients are like, my last therapist was awful. My last therapist harmed me. My last therapist didn't understand why I act this way, and it's because of my cultural upbringing. And I'm like, yes, heard. And I am obviously not perfect, and I'm always learning every day, and that's why I like being here, and that's why I like learning about all of these things. But I think that as social workers, we need to do way better, way better. And I could say a whole lot about this and just keep going on, but sometimes it's about sitting in the uncomfortableness of what it means of like the actual impact of your job. And I have to do that all the time when I consider if I have to call involuntary psychiatric hospitalization on someone. That can be extremely harmful, but that is a regular occurrence for so many social workers, including me. So it can be a regular occurrence. So how do we balance the real harms that we can do, the power that we have as social workers, and how do we learn from the history of social workers making a lot of mistakes because of this, in my head, white saviorism. And I honestly believe that there are racially marginalized social workers who then, because white social work is the only thing that's modeled to us, we then uptake that, and we become the social workers who contribute to the school to prison pipeline, for example. So I don't think that racially marginalized social workers are exempt from this either, me included. That's why I'm working so hard to try to talk about it. So I think if we sit in the uncomfortableness of our history, recognize why so many people have such a hard relationship with social workers, and then really understand, how do we fix this? How do we move forward? Because we need to take our history and then turn it into action.
Thank you, Felix, for touching on all of those things, the white saviorism, and also just like the internalized racism that comes with that, of like, yes, we need to know our history, but sometimes the things that we're taught are not helpful and also are hurting our communities as well. So like, how do we learn our history, like learn forgiveness for ourselves, and then like do better? Because that's what needs to happen. is that like change and doing better part as well. So just thank you for bringing those aspects up. I think Andrea is next. And please, if I say your name, please let me know.
No, that's fine. I think Colleen's hand was up before me, but I'm more than happy to talk if you want. Thank you, Felix, for what you shared. That was really very important. In listening to Brother Felix and Sister Evelyn, a couple of things have come to my mind. One, especially when you're talking about clinical issues, it puts me in mind of, we just recently lost Bishop Tutu. And one of my favorite sayings of his is that it's all well and good to pull people out of the river, but at some point we have to go, oh, good God, excuse me, okay? The real expert here. At some point, we have to go upstream and figure out why all these people are falling in the river. And nobody ever does that, because the solutions cannot be individual. They have to be systemic, or they won't have any weight or any power. So that we really have to look towards systemic change. And part of the, stop it, honey. Part of the route to systemic change is self-knowledge, understanding your history, understanding the truth of your history, which is not given to us in any way, shape, or form, and then using that to move on to action. The other piece, I think, is that we cannot be naive about what this system is really about. This system is not about getting us well, getting us healthy, getting us functional. One of the things the white supremacist system is very good at is monetizing misery. And that's what they've done. They've made an industry out of what they call dysfunction. They've made an industry out of child services, the correctional system, all of that. So that these are viable industries that make a lot of profit for them. There's no profit in us being well. There's no profit in us being whole. There's no profit in fill in the blank. Indigenous people getting their land back. There's no profit in that. If there was, they'd do it in 20 minutes. So that we have to not be naive about that and realize what the forces are that are keeping this system going this way. So that then once we have an honest reckoning about what it is, what keeps it going, what the investment is in it, then we have a way to start to figure out systemically how we can make a change in it. Otherwise, we just keep doing surface individual interventions, which will not change the sum total of what happens for us. I mean, if you look at what's going on now in the schools, because don't be naive. The powers that be know what the true history is. They have a vested interest in you not knowing what it is. That's why there's all this fights right now around so-called critical race theory in the schools. They don't want kids to know that. They don't want teachers to teach that. They don't want that because, again, knowledge is power, and they don't want that to happen. So don't be naive. They're not unaware. You're unaware because they made it their business to make sure that you were unaware. But they're aware of a lot of this stuff. Now it's their business to keep it from getting into the mainstream. So we have to find a way to work around that, work beyond that, educate, enrich ourselves in spite of that, and then move forward. I'm gonna be quiet now because the cat will be back in a minute. Yeah, it's about that time for him. So, he's all about him. Freedom is fine, but it's dinner time. So anyway, I'll let you move on. Thanks.
Thank you for contributing just those different aspects of like the solutions have to be systemic. Like, why are the people in the river? Like, clinical work and the things that are taught on the individual level are good because we do need to get those people out of the water. But like, how are they getting in there? And thinking about that is strategic for social work to not teach us how to make systemic changes, because it also is part of the problem and part of the system. If they teach us how to make systemic changes, then what can you monetize if we're actually helping and healing folks? You can't. It's systemic for macro to not be a focus. Like, that is how this works. and is how it is beneficial. And even thinking, which reminded me of like, oh, it's not beneficial for our wellness, which is so like funny because like if you look at the cost that it takes to solve some of these issues, just start with child welfare. If you solve child welfare and just the way that the system works, you'd actually be saving so much money in the long run. But they don't want to actually do that. They don't want to actually like help the child welfare system, because then the powers that be are not getting the same type of money, monetizing the same. People are not going to continue to benefit, even though on a larger scale these things would be beneficial. So it's like they don't want us to know these things. Like they don't want us to have this knowledge on like the actual history, because then one, we do something about it. Like once we find out these things, it normally creates change and reaction in us as well. So thank you for bringing that to light. I think Colleen was next.
Thank you. Andrea, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
We can
Okay,
hear
I just want to make sure. My kiddo's running around, so I don't have my video on. But Andrea just actually echoed so much of what I was going to comment on. So I appreciate, personally, as a white social worker, I have been trying to find something like this training.
We can't hear you.
There you go. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for sharing, because as a white social worker, I had originally been drawn to social work because of social justice issues and the civil rights movement, and trying to seek out that information in school was really difficult. Even asking for, what else are we going to learn on this subject? So I appreciate you guys hosting this, because it's really kind of the lack of including this history in social work. As I've grown and tried to learn more about our history and the US history, and what the powers that be have not been telling us for years in school, it's been really difficult to find that information. So as a social worker, I got sucked into the white saviorism and have been trying to learn as much as I can to get out of that thought process. So I was just kind of curious, as these discussions are rolling. I wasn't taught this in my undergrad or my graduate program, and I was kind of curious if there's any talks of including this in curriculum in the future. I think we all need to educate ourselves, but I also think that we would not be serving the future social workers or our community without trying to push to include this in formal education. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. And also, just kind of as a side note, I've only been doing social work for about 20 years, but seeing its ebbs and flows, when I started out, the person who trained me was somebody who I guess would consider grandfathered into social work, which I'm not sure they do anymore. I think it seems to be very focused on clinical licenses, things like that. And Miss Nina Thornton, taught me everything I knew, everything I know and love about social work. And she was, an older Black woman who had been doing this, child welfare stuff for years, and was not, completely educated. She did go to school and get a bachelor's degree, but she knew her community. So I would love to see that back in our training. If that's happening, maybe that's happening some places. Maybe it's just where I went to school. Things like that aren't happening anymore. But I guess I just kind of wanted to voice that and say thank you for hosting this. And I hope that maybe these conversations will be able to help change our social work as a profession and how we're viewed in the future.
Hi,
Yeah, thank you.
sorry,
No, it's okay, Felix. Do you mind if I say something real quick? Then you definitely can chime in.
sure, yeah.
Yeah. So just a reminder, Colleen, we thank you for like speaking and giving your opinion and sharing how it's felt, and like definitely we encourage posing questions, but we do just want to emphasize that if you do identify as white or you do not face racism on the everyday, to please remain in the chat. That is something that is super vital to this community and holding this space kind of sacred, just because a lot of times folks of color are not given the opportunity just to have a space to themselves. So we just ask that you please stay muted, and yeah, no problem. Like, we're gonna keep reminding and throughout, because we know people join late and stuff, but just want to emphasize again for other people who are coming late as well, and just like make it known, like, here's kind of the intent again, and then yeah, move forward in that fashion. Go ahead, Felix.
I was just gonna say the same thing, but I wanted to I think pose an important question for white people not to answer, but just to think about, is what is the importance of sharing out loud in a space like this when you can share it in the chat, if that makes sense? Like, what is your contribution and why is it important? Because I think that there's a reason that we have this boundary in place, and there's, I guess, yeah, I don't need to restate that question, just thinking about it.
Yeah, thank you, Felix, for just posing that question. And I think it can be very valuable to just kind of think on and reflect about. If there are any more folks who want to jump in and talk about just kind of the history of social work, what have you learned, what's been missing? Even if you want to mention something we had thought about is like, what does your community specifically contribute to social work? Like, how do they embody social work? What does it look like for them or for us if you are Black identified? Like, what does it look like in our communities for us to do social work?
I just
Hi,
like to
everyone.
say, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
Ursula has their hand up. And if anyone else wants to speak, please use the hand function.
Where is the hand function?
Yeah, it's at the bottom. If you click more, there should be like a hand function. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'm stating my age in a way, so, but thank you.
No problem. Ursula?
Yes, okay, thank you. I'm still in my student phase. I'm towards the end. I really do enjoy this profession. And one thing that sticks out that hasn't been able to leave my mind is when we speak on empowerment. During those modules, that was the time during like the George Floyd killing and just that uprising, and it spoke volumes. The thing about how we were taught as far as this empowerment is that yes, you can have freedom of speech, you can say what you need to say, but you cannot go against the powers that be. And I found that kind of odd, because if the powers that be have a certain type of implicit bias or a supremacy, racism over, the minority or the racially inclined groups, then how would I be able to help advocate for my clients if they're expressing their hurts and their pains, their sorrows, that could have or that has occurred due to the racial bias against them? When they come into us, we have a certain type of criteria that we have, to ask them, and it's not tailored to their situations. It's tailored to according to what the powers that be think. Okay, well, this is probably what your situation is, so this is how we're going to handle it this way because I say so. That I'm white and I'm say so, so don't worry, it'll be okay. But I'm seeing that nothing's being done in the right direction. Nothing, people are not really getting helped as they should be, as powerful as this country is. And I just wanted to know, what are some suggestions, as a student that's going out to the field, not to be discouraged, of what to do, and how can I help empower my clients if I'm taught not to go against the powers that be? Not that I'm trying to stage a coup, but it's like, if they're telling me what their pains and their sufferings, and then we can visually see this thing, how am I supposed to help them? And just it'll be okay, just putting like sugar on boo boo. Like, how am I supposed to do that? You guys understand what I'm saying?
Mhm. Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ursula, for sharing that as well. I think it's true. Like, what do you tell them? How do you comfort them? With and I think I saw Felix put in the chat of like that they tell them that like it's not okay. How do you hold the distance of like, yes, we have to do something, but this right now is like not good. It's not okay. So I don't know if other people have thoughts or opinions on that. But I think Amber D is next.
Hi, yes. I identify as being African American Black, and I just really appreciated the history, like going way back. And that book seems like it's a treasured gem that needs to be reproduced. So fingers crossed about that. If someone has any kind of power to get it republished, not trying to revamp it and update it, but just if somebody could get it printed for the time that it was created. Anyhow, but one person I wanted to elevate, and this is during the civil rights era, is Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm reading her a new book written about her. And to me, she had the spirit of a social worker. And I gotta say, I am clinical, and being clinical, a licensed clinical social worker doing therapy is going to set me up to retire, I think, and make sufficient coins. However, I think the true spirit is someone like Fannie Lou Hamer. And I just recommend anyone who hasn't read about her or studied her deeply, even though she's not a traditional social worker. She came from a family of sharecroppers, 20 siblings. I think they said that she stopped school at the age of 12, but she crusaded, and like her legacy of change in the South is tremendous. So I'm listening to the book right now, Audible. And so we have to continue to saturate ourselves with like these type of sheroes. And of course there are heroes too, and become more emboldened. So if I can retire early, maybe I can be like her and do things later in life. But right now I do have to kind of focus on my coins, because like it's really stressful being Black and feeling like maybe you won't have enough money for your life course. So thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing about Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm adding that person to the important social work figures. So I'm sure I will learn a lot in this second. As I think the next person is Latoya Griffin.
Hi, I've so appreciated the shares, all of the shares with everyone previously. So thank you so much in that. I guess I'll also share in just, I'm in the clinical realm, so I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a certified group psychotherapist is the fields that I'm operating in, right? And within those fields, I've had to be very attentive to the systemic racism that's been present, and be very intentional and diligent about bringing in cultural identity into those spaces, as well as intentional about calling in colleagues and other professionals to be attentive to those things as well. And working on, like, in the earlier question about how to, it's a little different when I was in my, undergrad years and graduate years about how to handle things now, but I do feel like having those supports in place to make sure that when we're seeing the problems in the system, that we're calling them in, and that we have sufficient supports in place so that we're not calling them in alone. So when I'm in organization, some of my professional organizations and settings right now where I'm calling them in to do policy and procedure changes, because there's been this, when it was talked about earlier, the institutional setup to keep people disenfranchised. There's some of the settings I'm in where historically there have been white males who have dominated in terms of providing training, information, resources, and people of color who are calling that in to say that's not something that we're going to allow to continue. But you can't do it by myself. It's having connection with my colleagues who are also in the same labor to assist in that process. And so I invite you, when you're talking about even in the training years, to call in those things as you see them, but having supports to do that, and documentation, making sure that if we're working with clients, that I'm making sure in my documentation to be attentive to cultural concerns. And then in terms of the history piece, for me, it's like making sure to continue to gather the pool of resources, and that's books. I so appreciated when people were dropping books and information in the chat, because sometimes accessing resources, there's some who are at academic institutions and they have more, some resources more readily available, but any of the settings that I go in, and I've gone to a lot of the more identity-based like organizations like ABSI I'm getting involved in, and then Asian American Psychological Association, where there are resources that are identity-based, where I can continue to build my toolkit of stuff. So having that toolkit, whether it's books, videos, websites, so that we're continuing, like I think Felix was saying earlier, that ongoing learning, that we're all in this ongoing learning process, and that we have the resources to help in that. So that's probably enough for me right now. So thank you all again. I'm glad to be able to be in this space.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Latoya. Just even the importance of a community and being supported when you're doing some of these things. Sometimes it can be really daunting to try to do these things alone and not feel like you have people to back you up. So just finding that community can be so important. And I think one of the things that we're always hoping for is that this space can be a sense of community to, you find some people who are like in your area or who have the same values or whatever it is, and y'all can support each other. We can support each other, and what does that look like? So we appreciate you sharing. I know we are reaching kind of the end, and I know, Gerald, that you had your hand up. I don't know if you still wanted to say something, but if not, we will finish off with Dawn.
I will say something. I'm interested in finding out who the we is, who the them is, and I think we are the we are the them. I think that social work, we have shifted our focus. One person I didn't learn about in school, I think, was Mary Chapin Reynolds. So those folks that were radical social workers, I think that, there's some of us that went into the field, we're going to change the world, we're going to change the system. And many of us are awakening to the fact that we are the system, that we're supporting the system. And I think because social work has gone from community-based, I don't know any social workers that work in the community anymore. We've got our offices downtown. Persons come to us. If they don't make it to the appointment, they're no-shows, they're treatment resistant, etc. I think we've got to look at our service models and get back into communities, those that are not. And as folks have been saying, call people in to work on things. I think that we went into therapy, social workers went to therapy and started being therapists because we wanted to get paid. There was no money in community work. But I think we need to find out, I'm learning about writing grants and finding a way for us to make a living while we fully embrace those social work values that we want. And it's not easy because we are in that model that's been made for us, right? That neoliberal capitalism that's taken resources away, but on the other side, we've got the social determinants of health. Okay, so I think there's someone else mentioned that there's money that we're throwing at problems and wasting it when it could be much more efficiently used somewhere else. And I think communities are open to that if we're able to bring it to them. And I think senators, legislators, they want to save money. And I think that if we let legislators know what the problem is and have suggestions for solutions, I think they can happen. In my work as an inpatient psychiatric social worker, yes, definitely systemic racism is all around. What gets me to sleep at night is that, you know, the folks that I'm working with, if I were not there, you know, what kind of treatment would they be receiving? I have a person that I worked with recently who English was not their first language. And so this person would self-harm when they were upset. So New York State, you need a translator. We got them a translator. The behavior ceased. Okay, so now we pathologized this person's behavior because they were frustrated. We got them a translator, and now the behavior is gone. But yet there's still a borderline personality disorder. That doesn't go away. So I just think we can do some things. We have to be creative, and I don't think it's going to be easy. Last thing, one historical thing that I just learned that was an aha moment for me was Rosa Parks. The intervention that Rosa Parks did on the bus wasn't because she was tired. She may have been tired, but it was planned. She was a secretary for the local NAACP. They tried it, I think, months before with another woman, but because she was pregnant, they didn't think that was a good fit. But just knowing that, I mean, it just changes the way I feel about that whole history. This was a plan. This is something that Black people put together and did, not just someone who was just tired. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Gerald. I think you bring up an important point that like the things we have to do have to be strategic. Like with Rosa Parks, like it's like, what does that tell us when we're taught like she just sat because she was tired and not because they spent months and like years strategically planning on how to do this, or even like any of the riots and protests that happened. Like King was very adamant and strategic about the way those went with like, hey, make sure the media is there. The media is a big thing right now. We need to make sure they're seeing this. So it wasn't just like America decided to change itself. It was like other countries started to see kind of everything that was happening and it was like, this is not going well. What is happening here? You know, and it like brought a lot of attention to it. It's like, that wasn't just like let's get together and like figure it out in 2 seconds. Like, no, that was strategy and like up late at night and like adamant, you know, work and like intentionality on justice and equity for people. And it wasn't just like, you know, at the will, whatever. So like, it is going to be hard. It is going to take time. But I think like, that's what we have to do is like, be the strategy, be strategic and like find ways to do it. Cause when we leave it in the hands of white folks to do it, it just doesn't happen. It's things are missed. Things are not, you know, as intentional as they could be. Communities are harmed and hurt and things like that. So yeah, I just appreciate you bringing that up. Dawn, do you mind closing us out and sharing some more thoughts?
Sure. One thing I wanted to share was there was a video that came out a few years ago, 100 years of social work. So I watched it and they spoke about Whitney, we have a healthcare center here in Albany, Whitney Young. And that was the only person of color that I saw in that video. So I think as people begin to do things, I think they just move and they don't include people of color. Like, wait, there's more folks who have done things that you're not including in this video. And so speaking up at agencies and things of that nature, but before you speak up, because most people say you have to pay your rent, your mortgage. So it's really a matter of, if your agency has put up, like many agencies, an anti-racism clause, is it hanging in the office? Is it hanging in the executive director's office or the door? Raise your hand if your agency has put up an anti-racism clause, and especially with what happened to Floyd. People seem to want to develop these things, especially social work agencies. So no agency even did that. 1, 2, 3. Wow. 4. Okay, there's a few.
These aren't agencies, this is a professional organization, I should clarify.
Yeah, either way. But if they committed to anti-racism, looking at your policies, looking at your actions, all the things that you do at your agency, then they're saying that they're committed. That's where you start, because if they say that they're committed to this, you get a couple more people from your agencies who also want to commit to change. And you remind people, we've put this up. We didn't put it up just to have it up. And remind the executive director and the other folks about what's going on. If anything is harming our people in these communities from these agencies, we have to take a stand. It can't happen. It can't happen. And so it's about really getting folks who are like-minded with you, and not just people of color. There may be some white folks who are in that agency as well, who see what's happening and want to be a part of the change. But the people of color, you need to lead the charge. You need to lead the charge, but you have a mixed group of people behind you. And what's happening too, if you're not heard, if nothing's happening, if they threaten to, that they're going to get rid of you or anything like that, what I'll say to that is, that's the chance that many people have taken before us, and they have been fired. What'd you say? They have been fired. They didn't have incomes, but they took the chance to make us right here, right now, to be where we're at. We were able to go to school, undergraduate and graduate school. And we still have a long ways to go, I believe, but we can make the change. Coming together like this is our medicine. And then we go out, strategize, strategize, strategize. Then you can maybe even bring it back and talk to some people here and say, hey, this is what we're thinking at our agency. How's it sound to you? Has anybody done this? So we have to use our collective selves together. So again, you're not just by yourself out there. You know, you have, I don't know, Sam, what were they up to? 500 people who signed up for this? So you're not alone. And there's many people at their agencies who are going through these things. And most you, of course, you're important too as social workers, but our clients are, we have some agencies that's been in some communities for years and working with families generationally. We need to start asking questions. We need to start looking at what is going on. Are they really helping these families? So we all have a job to do. The work is not done. We have to keep on keeping on. We have to stay optimistic. We have to support our clients and see in them what nobody else may see. I would always tell my clients, share what was, if they did something good. Because some of our clients, as you know, live in worlds where they're not giving that affirmation. So we have to see in them what nobody else may see as a social worker, and then tell them about it. And it may be simple like, wow, okay, you brought all the kids to the school today. That's great. We don't have to always look for big things. But we have to really work with our clients in that way. Somebody was saying, how do you really work with clients effectively? The one thing is just seeing what nobody else may see about your client. Not just pathology, but their strengths, what they're coming with and what they're doing. And so that's all I got to say today. I thank you all for coming. This was great. We're going to continue the conversation, continue thinking about how we can go about making these changes, because it can be done. We got to strategize though. Thank you all for coming.
Before we leave, can I just share one thing because my head will explode?
Yes.
Oh,
Andrea, hey.
Yes, I think yes, what you said is very valid. You have to ask the questions, work for the change within your agencies, that sort of thing. But I think we also cannot overlook the history and the capabilities that Sister Evelyn just told us about.
Right.
For generations, Black people have done their own social work in their own communities, and we have to broaden our connections with our community. I'm a licensed clinician myself. However, I also work with communities of faith. I also work with neighborhood communities. I work with fraternities, sororities, all of those things, because those are the people that are on the ground and that have historically been there to do the things that need to be done for our people. I mean, yes, you don't stop working on the other side ever, because I always hold their feet to the fire. But we also have to use what we already have, what we do, what we know. You know, the other side is good, but I keep in mind that those are the master's tools. We need to use what we have and the strengths that we have, and our strength is our community, and that we will mobilize for each other. And we have to make those connections. I think sometimes because we get these lofty clinical degrees that we think that, oh, well, we can't work with. Yes, we can. People know things, people do things, people are connected. And that's the way that we can do meaningful change for each other, but also have a base to have a loud enough voice to make these others pay attention. So we have to not forget those people. And there are a lot of people that are out there that are doing the work, that have been doing the work for generations. You know, I know for myself, I never met a person in foster care until I went to college. Because in our community, nobody went to foster care. If your mother was out there, your father was gone, your parents are dead, somebody took you in, somebody took care of you. So that we have to start to get back to, you know, and again, go back to what we know, who we are. Sankofa, we've done this for generations, for centuries, and we've somehow been, through social work education and clinical education and whatever, been taught that, oh no, this is not good and this is not what we do. We have to do, you know, we have to do IFS, we have to do EMDR, we have to do that stuff. And there's a place for some of that, but that doesn't negate the need for us as a community to band together and help support and do interventions for the people in our communities that need that. So I just needed to say that so that I could sleep tonight. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. We're glad you can sleep tonight.
Yes, yes.
But thank you everyone else for coming. Please enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you everyone who shared and those of you who didn't share. This was a meaningful space. So
Right.
I would say get home safe or we're on Zoom. Right.